Welcome to the Learning Lounge. I'm Dr. Joel Gardner, and today I have with me Dr. Yuerong Sweetland, who is the Director of Assessment at Franklin University. She's also a faculty member in our doctoral and our master's programs in the Institute, in research methods and in evaluation, and is now officially a peer reviewer for the Higher Learning Commission. So congratulations on that. That's a recent achievement. It's great to have you, Yuerong.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner. I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk about, assessment and learning topics that I'm passionate about.
Your favorite topics, right?
Yes. Okay,
good. Well, so let's start out here just by talking about what is assessment. What does it mean to assess?
Assessment is really, a lot of people actually as faculty members, you might be involved in assessment. As co-curricular professionals in higher education institutions, you might be involved in assessment. Maybe, assessment is not necessarily you do on a regular basis, but really it's collecting data, it's using data, it's collecting data, analyzing data, and using data to inform decision making. So that's assessment. And when we talk about, assessment at the program and the university level, it's really about the systematic investigation into the overall curriculum, the overall pedagogy, and the overall co-curriculum, how these different components work together to impact student learning and success.
So assessment, generally, not even related to learning, assessment is collecting data about whatever the thing is, whatever the item is you're interested in.
Right.
Analyzing it, and then you added in using it.
Right.
So I think, to me, that's different. In my mind, when I think about it, I think assess. That's just trying to figure out what's going on. But now you're adding in, how do we use this data, or how do we integrate it into our decision-making so that we can make good decisions?
That's right. And most recently, I was talking to a group of faculty members, and later on I said, data is really nothing unless you translate it into actionable insights and then turn it into items, improvement plans. So if you just have a bunch of assessment data sitting on the shelf or sitting in the computer, it doesn't really do anything. And it's not sustainable.
Totally true. I agree with that. But how do you make something actionable, right? Because at least at our university, every university has millions and millions of points of data, right? So how do you make something so that it's actually actionable?
I think there are several key factors. There are several things that we need to pay attention. First and foremost, I think it is really important that assessment is meaningful. It's not about something so far away from the reality, so far away from the teaching and learning reality. And I remember years ago, we used these nationally normed instruments to assess student learning in general education outcomes. And we did that, and we got the support of faculty members, but really it's just so far away from our curriculum and so far away from our students' realities. And students were against it, and the professors who were teaching those classes where we integrated that instrument were against it, although they were very polite. But ultimately, we just could not use that data because it doesn't, using an evaluation term, it doesn't have curriculum validity. So what I'm saying with this example is that assessment needs to be valid. It needs to be tied to your curriculum. So it needs to have meaning for your faculty members as well as students. So that's the number one thing. Great. And another thing is, I think collaboration is key. Collaboration between different faculty members, between the program area faculty, the major area faculty members, the instructional designers, they play a key role in informing, in educating us how students learn best, how adult students learn best, how we can organize the curriculum better, and then pedagogical experts, as well as co-curricular areas, because they provide a lot of programs that are designed to enhance student learning outside of what's going on in the classroom. But unless all of these people sit together, talk about these assessment findings, if it is just, one person, like a director of assessment, he or she or myself have access to all of these assessment data. But unless we start talking to each other and really understand what this data mean for our curriculum, for our pedagogical approaches or teacher professional development needs, we can't turn them into action items. So it has to be collaborative discussions, collaborative opportunities for people to work on this together. And then
Great. So you have to make a meaning out of it.
Make meaning out of it.
So you align it to maybe tie it to your curriculum, align it to what you're doing.
Right.
Be collaborative in your approach. And you mentioned a lot of people when you were just talking, the big group of stakeholders, different departments, different people, and then also make meaning out of it. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Right. I was also going to say, these days, long time ago, when I started in assessment, I tended to focus on the outcome data. Yes, that tell us, to what extent students are achieving these outcomes or are learning these things that we deliver to them. But oftentimes it doesn't necessarily tell us, why they are where they are today, why they're learning, why they're not learning. So another important piece of the puzzle is that we also need to look into the processes of student learning. That is, there are, different ways of getting this kind of information. There are surveys. We need to understand what their perceptions are, what they think, a certain course is working, a certain course might not be working as well as it should have been. And then also these days, as higher ed continue to evolve with the use of technology, data analytics can play a very important role in this loop of using assessment and to improve teaching and learning.
Very good. Now, you've started talking about some of how we do things here at Franklin.
Yes.
So maybe you can give just a more broad description or a more detailed description of how we do our assessment here at Franklin University. And this is for program assessment, right?
Right.
So how do we do things here?
Yes, I kind of alluded that a little bit. It's not just looking at the outcome. And looking at the outcome, you still want to look at the multiple points. Maybe when students come in, where their levels are, the pre and post test, and then do not just rely on, the capstone course, just a one assignment. Because let's face it, as evaluation professionals, we all know one assessment sometimes can be biased. Whether how we design it, how we evaluate it, the rubrics that we use. So it's a multiple assessment on the outcomes. And then, as you mentioned, we use rubrics here. Right. And we build these rubrics into our learning management system, Blue Quill, to really facilitate program outcome assessment as well as general education outcome assessment. And I want to mention that years ago, we spent so much time doing assessment. And when we got our assessment findings and we got together to talk about, how can we use these assessment findings, our curriculum already changed. Maybe the industry has changed. Industry guidelines changed or textbooks changed or whatever has changed. So, but these days we really embed our assessment, program assessment, general education assessment into courses so that we have ongoing data. And if something is not right, we can, take immediate actions. So that's one thing. And another thing, as I mentioned, we want to use multiple measures, and it's not just on the outcome part, to what extent students are able to achieve this outcome or that outcome, but also looking at the processes. As I mentioned, you can survey students. So in all of our courses, we have this course survey that really looks into the different aspects of the curriculum of the course, to what extent they're enhancing student learning. And then also the different components of teaching, to what extent the teachers are respectful of students, helping students learn, or the various components of pedagogical approaches. Right. So that's those two. And we also asked about student own behaviors. Hopefully that information can help students reflect on, to what extent I'm using the various to what extent am I putting in a lot of time or a lot of effort into this course, and hopefully that connects to how well they're learning. So, and then in one of the capstone courses, we're also asking students to not only comment on to what extent they're meeting these learning outcomes, and we're also asking students to reflect on these particular courses in the curriculum that are designed to help students achieve these corresponding outcomes. So we want to correlate between students' perceptions of the value of these courses and their perceptions of their outcome achievement. And we want to correlate these different data points to see, if there's this one course, the value is the perceived value from the students is not necessarily correlated with the outcome achievement, then we need to dig further into this course to see where the problem might be. Right. And then, as I mentioned, the data analytics will continue to play bigger and bigger roles in the assessment field.
I love it. So let's talk about that in a minute, because I do want to get a little bit more into the data analytics, learning analytics part. But so really quickly, though, when you were talking about all these different ways that we're assessing, and some of the things you mentioned weren't necessarily every program has all those things. Some of them were specific to specific programs.
Some programs.
But still, what I'm hearing is we try to have many points of data. And so in research, we call this triangulation. Right?
Yes.
So we want to triangulate. We want to make sure that, this kind of data is telling us this about the program and how the students are doing. But then these data over here are giving us similar, but it's a little different, and their reflections here. So we're trying to triangulate to really get a good picture of what's going on so that we can make good decisions, right?
That's right, yes. Okay. And, in the past, long time ago, I talked about triangulation. In my office, I still have that poster about this triangulated assessment system. So in the past, we just put this data side by side. But we really go beyond that. We correlate these different data points, and in combination of student path. Some of these students might not necessarily be taking certain courses here, and how does that compare with students who have a different path, students who take these courses here. And in combination with data analytics, to what extent these students are utilizing the resources in the courses, to what extent they're utilizing the co-curricular, let's say workshops, co-curricular offerings, workshops offered by the Learning Commons. So it's getting more and more complicated, but it's providing more and more and more authentic picture of student learning.
Right. And it's the interesting thing about assessment is that, or an evaluation, if you want to use that term, or research in general, gathering data to try to understand something, is that you have to decide how much of the data you report on, or what you bring in, or what to gather data on, and how much of that is relevant, and which ones you can clear out or not clear out, and what to even report, and which ones to act on. There's decisions that have to be made all along, and it can be very complex. I tend to veer toward simplicity. Give me the most simplicity. But then when I talk to you about how you're gathering the data, it's ultra complex. And every time I walk in, not every time, but many times I walk into your office and you're looking at some kind of, I think it might be SPSS, some statistical analysis software. And I can tell you're doing models in your head. Anyway, it's amazing. But so there's a balance there. It's very difficult to find, but you have to find some kind of balance. That's right.
And especially in communicating with the different stakeholders, there definitely is this balance that assessment professionals or anybody, need to pay attention to, because because as I mentioned, turning data into action, to turn data into action, collaboration is key. So you don't want to lose your audience, which your important stakeholders, in this overwhelming ocean of data. So pick the most important revealing patterns or the most obvious patterns and show it to your high-level stakeholders, and hopefully you can get buy-in. And as I've observed over the years, if you want to turn data into action items, having leadership support is very important. But you don't want to overwhelm your provost, your president with so many data points that, people cannot even see what is this about. Right. So, it's a high-level data.
Just three data points. That's all.
Three data points. That's right, yes. And then I think some trend data is important so that people can see it's not just within one trimester or even 1 year, but within the past 3 years. But then, of course, these days, technology development goes so fast, and then the field that we're in, business and marketing, these things change so fast. We also need to be really adaptive because, if we look at 5 years, year 5, 5 years ago, things are just so different than what they are. So right now, we don't want assessment to become irrelevant, to be outdated.
Right.
So, yes, relevant and to the point, yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that helps it be actionable, like we talked about earlier, right?
Right.
So just briefly, what are some of the, so you do an assessment, you work with your faculty member, you have all of these data points that you mentioned, you gather the data, you do some analysis, you put together, collaborating with them, some kind of report, and you're ready to take action. What are a few of the main or frequent actions you see a faculty member or a university taking based on assessment data?
Oftentimes, I think the number one kind of action item is with regard to curriculum, because I think that's one of the most critical components. What can we do? With regard to curriculum, sometimes it's like, we don't, we think students are lacking in strategic planning in the field of accounting, let's say.
Right.
So do we provide enough opportunities for, yes, we introduce students to these, but do we provide enough opportunities for students to be engaged in strategic planning? So it's about looking at the curriculum where there might be a weak link there. And sometimes it's adding more resources to students, for students. Sometimes it's adding more, scaffolding opportunities. And then sometimes it's we realize, hey, it's the assessment itself. It's assignment. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we build our assessment into courses. So we use this course-embedded assessment. So assessment artifacts are really these assignments, these projects that are built into courses. And sometimes we realize, hey, these assignments need to be tweaked because they do not necessarily provide the best venue for students to demonstrate their competency in engaging in strategic planning for a accounting firm, something like that. Right. And sometimes we realize, hey, the rubric needs to be tweaked a little bit because these rubrics are kind of vague or they're not really targeting. There's a gap between the rubric, the evaluation rubric, and what students have been asked to do.
Right.
So then the assessment results look, not so, not as well as we expected to be, but that's because students have not been asked to do that. So,
good.
Yes.
So really though, just from your answer, and I know I know there's more, right? But from your answer, it tells me that the types of action that you take are very complex. It could be very, very complex. Sometimes it may be obvious, and here's the main thing that you do, but it might not be. Maybe there are. You have to do more analysis to say, well, that was really weird. Why? And you have to go and look at the course, or talk to the instructors, or even talk to students, and look at the data. The myriad forms of data that we have to really grasp why this particular issue is happening. And sometimes maybe it's just expert judgment and we make a decision and move forward, right?
That's true. And, sometimes it's not like a local issue. Maybe it's not just within one course or within one assignment.
Could be across.
Throughout, across the curriculum, within one program's curriculum or maybe across the curriculum because, we oftentimes find out students their reading communication skills could be improved. Right. And really that's across the curriculum issue.
Right. So we are out of time. But we had one more question I was going to ask you that I mentioned earlier. I was going to ask, what's the future of assessment? And you mentioned learning analytics. And I also see that as a huge opportunity for universities.
That's right.
So if you can just very briefly describe what you see this future of analytics being like. What are some of the things you think will come along the next few years and what should we be doing to really meet those and embrace them?
Wow, in a few words. So I think we
5
really,
words. You only get
yes,
5 words. No, just go ahead. Take your time. Yeah, go ahead.
make the best use. We will continue to use our learning management system because because that's where learning and teaching are happening. So the teaching analytics, to what extent teachers are providing the feedback, what kind of feedback they're providing. So all of these teaching behavior, all of these learning behaviors, so these cannot be isolated, the teaching, learning, and then what students are doing, in terms of learning, in terms of achieving this particular learning outcomes. Right. What students are doing outside of the classes, that is, do they attend workshops? Do they attend? Do they go to their student affairs professional? Do they go to those appointments? So all of these different behaviors, they all we need to tap into them, and we need to look at them systematically to understand, which particular component is having an impact towards their final learning outcome. Which particular component may not necessarily be related. It's just tangential. But
right.
So it's a very complicated. I think learning is a very complicated issue, and there are so many things involved. And I think with technology, with this learning, data analytics, we have a better grasp. We'll have a better grasp in understanding what helps students learn, what is not necessarily conducive to learning.
That is amazing. I love that. And to me, it sounds like a big part of it is an organization contributing time and energy to really understand what those relationships are. Right? Dependent variable, independent variable of student success. Right? And what's the variable that's really going to contribute to that student success or doesn't, right? What's the statistically significant variables? So there's a lot. We have tons of data. You're saying we need to connect data, more points of data within so that we can do that analysis and understand. Okay.
Right. That's what I think.
And then we know how to take better action because we have better data and understand what works and what doesn't.
Right. So
I wish we weren't out of time, but we are.
Yes.
So maybe at some point we'll have another discussion on learning analytics because I think you and I have had a few conversations about it, just in our work that we do.
Right.
Here in Franklin,
yeah. What can we build into courses to capture students' perceptions along the way, rather than at the very end of the course? Course is over. How can we help them? Yeah,
I think it's powerful.
Yes, and then another thing that we can also talk about is the, how we tap assessment into the SOTO, Scholarship on Teaching and Learning, so that assessment is not just mundane, but really it can be tapped into scholarship to really encourage faculty members to be invested in this.
Oh, I love it. Well, Dr. Sweetland,
thank you.
Thank you so much for the time. And we will look forward to talking again sometime.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.